Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Inflation has been a really hot topic in the past couple years, and rightly so. Amid supply chain shortages and stimulus packages, inflation surged all the way up to just above 9%, a number we hadn't seen in nearly 4 decades. The general target for our economy's inflation is a rate of 2%, and the big question on so many people's minds is how long is it going to take to get back to that benchmark? But the good news is, as with most things in politics and economics, is we have one solid consensus across the board. Wait, that's not true at all. It's the exact opposite. Some economists are optimistic that we might actually be able to hit this 2% target by the end of this year, 2024. Just as many, however, see inflation continuing at a higher clip through 2025 and even through 2026. And while inflation is certainly down from those highs and now hovering around 3% based on the most recent economic data, that is certainly higher than the long-term 2% benchmark that the Fed is aiming for. And when it comes to topics like economics or fitness or health, the general consensus is if you're not confused, you're probably doing something wrong, because experts don't tend to agree. And the reason is because there's so many unknowables. And while it's absolutely good news that our inflation is down and now near 3%, it shows that significant improvements have been made. It's still higher than that ideal benchmark of 2%. And getting to that 2% is likely to take a long period of time. As the Fed is currently holding interest rates at the highest we've seen in decades, our economy is definitely starting to feel the effects. Mortgage rates are holding steady above 6%, making housing affordability a stretch for many. Also, expectations in the labor market are starting to cool. Yes, job growth has continued to surpass economists' predictions, but we are slowly starting to see an uptick in unemployment, although it is still at very low levels. And such a strong labor market has really been one of the key indicators that has prevented the National Bureau of Economic Research from declaring the U.S. in a recession. But even though a recession has never been declared, it is worth keeping in mind that recessions are never declared as you're in them. They are declared retroactively looking backwards. So a recession may one day be declared, and we could find out that we were in fact in a recession. Only time will tell. Regardless of whether a recession is declared or not, so many of us have really been acutely feeling the effects of inflation. For many, as they watch the price of gas and food and utilities go up and stretch their budgets thin, they might ask themselves the question, perhaps the Fed should aim for 0% inflation. Why not just keep purchasing power constant? Do we really need inflation at all? Well, policymakers and economists alike generally agree that modest inflation is good for an economy, generally aiming for that Goldilocks number of 2%. Just as high inflation has a negative impact on the economy, so too does very low or no inflation. It also has a negative impact on the economy. It is believed that Goldilocks number of 2% helps to maintain stable prices while maintaining maximum employment. Here's why. Having this modest figure like 2% helps to keep prices stable. It doesn't have prices increasing too quickly relative to incomes, because if we have prices increasing too quickly for homes and goods and cars relative to income, that hurts the consumer. But on the flip side, it doesn't allow prices to decline. And at the onset, you might think that declining prices might be a good thing, because that would mean your dollar goes further, right? But if prices are falling across the board, as in a deflationary environment, this actually discourages people from saving and investing. Because what's the point of saving and investing if the dollar is just going to go further over time? It also discourages spending, because what's the point in buying an item today if it's going to be cheaper tomorrow or next week? This can be very damaging to an economy as a whole, because when people hold back on their spending, this reduces economic activity. It can cause an uptick in unemployment, it can reduce the outputs by companies, and this can start a whole downward contraction spiral for the economy. The subtle increase in prices helps to encourage people to spend today and invest for their future. It sort of nudges our economy along. If you anticipate that prices are going to be higher in the future, there's an incentive to buy today. Just as if you anticipate that life is going to be more expensive in 20, 30, 40 years' time, there's an incentive to invest today. Also, when we have some level of inflation, like 2%, this gives the Federal Reserve a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to monetary policy. They can adjust the interest rates to sort of spur along the economy or to slowly put the brakes on the economy. If they want to increase interest rates, this is going to slow economic activity because it makes the cost of borrowing more expensive. It makes everything a bit more expensive, as we've seen in recent years. But if they want to lower interest rates, that's going to increase economic activity because it makes the cost of borrowing cheaper. If rates are at or near 0%, it doesn't really give the Fed any room to lower the rates in order to encourage economic activity, because you can't really lower the rates less than 0%. A silver lining about inflation is that it helps to reduce the real cost of our debt burden over time. For instance, back in the year 2000, the cost of the median home sold was about $170,000, and the median mortgage was about $1,100 a month. Fast forward 24 years, an $1,100 mortgage doesn't look so bad, assuming you locked in a 30-year mortgage. If your wages have increased over time, your mortgage payment is taking up less and less of your income. Whereas today, the median home price is over $400,000 and the median mortgage is about $2,200 a month. If the overall value of our debt is not decreasing over time, it does make it harder for us to repay it. So ultimately, a little bit of inflation is a good thing, and that's why we aim for that target rate of about 2%. Too much inflation isn't good for an economy, just as too little inflation isn't good for an economy. But we still have a long way to go to get from 3% to 2%. The clock does seem to be counting down, questioning when the Fed will start making rate cuts. Because they don't want to hold rates too high for too long, because that could encourage recessionary activity within the economy. Some economists are optimistic, saying the first round of rate cuts could come as early as September of 2024, so just next month. Others are not as optimistic, saying that inflation is still running a little bit too hot and those first rounds of rate cuts might not come until December of this year, so we'll just have to wait and see. Rate cuts are absolutely necessary, but keep in mind, once the Fed does start to cut interest rates, this is going to encourage economic activity. It's going to spur along the economy. So it's going to make the process of going from a 3% rate of inflation to a 2% rate of inflation a little bit longer, but maybe it'll help us sidestep a recession, and maybe it'll keep those unemployment levels in check. In the meantime, while these rates are higher, it can be a good time to make sure that you're getting a great rate on your cash accounts or your emergency savings. Current shorter-term T-bills are paying around 5%, and 26-week T-bills are paying just under that 5% threshold. And T-bills aren't the only place where you can lock in a great rate on cash accounts. You can also take advantage of CDs, which have very comparable rates. On the flip side, if you have a high-yield savings account or money market fund, which are wonderful places to keep short-term cash reserves, keep in mind that the interest rates on these is generally not locked in. So as the Fed starts to cut interest rates, the interest rates offered on these accounts is going to decline as well. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. It really depends on your personal situation and how readily you need your funds available. So it just depends on what your circumstances are. All of these accounts are great options for short-term cash reserves and emergency savings. When do you think the Fed is going to hit its target inflationary mark of 2%? Leave your thoughts in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.